Did you know that there are people in the real world who dedicate their lives to hunting creatures? Most consider legendary cryptozoologists, extreme explorers, and even some military experts have reported encounters with animals that challenge our understanding of nature. But here's the frightening truth. Even with all the modern technology, cutting-edge military equipment, and decades of training, these people face an alarming mortality rate. And today, I'll show you why you, the average person, wouldn't last a day in this profession. The reality of hunting dangerous creatures is far more brutal than any movie or game has ever shown. We're talking about an activity where every mistake can be fatal, where years of preparation can be destroyed by a second of distraction, and where even the most seasoned professionals admit they rely more on luck than they'd like. Before we dive into this dark world, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me what time you're watching this video. This helps me a lot with the algorithm and shows me when you're most active here. Let's start with something that seems simple but is absolutely crucial: physical conditioning. You've probably seen documentaries about crocodile hunters in Australia or people handling big cats in Africa. What these programs don't show is the insane level of physical fitness required. Steve Irwin, the famous crocodile hunter, trains 6 hours a day, every day, from the age of 5. He grew up literally wrestling with giant reptiles. Even so, a moment of inattention was enough for a stingray to kill him. Now imagine facing something even more dangerous. Historical accounts of bear hunters in Siberia show that even the strongest men in the region, people who grew up in the wild, had a maximum life expectancy of 10 years in the profession. And we're just talking about ordinary bears, not mythical creatures with supernatural powers. The issue of physical endurance goes far beyond what you might imagine. In 2019, an American military study analyzed the limits of the human body in extreme combat situations. They found that even elite soldiers, after just 20 minutes of intense combat wearing heavy equipment, begin to lose critical motor coordination. Their reactions slow 40%, their accuracy drops by half, and their judgment is compromised. This is against other humans, against a supernatural creature. Those 20 minutes would become to minutes, but physical conditioning is just the beginning. The psychological issue is even more frightening. There's a documented condition called predator paralysis, where the human mind simply freezes when confronted with something it perceives as a superior predator. This is an evolutionary mechanism that has kept us alive for thousands of years, but would be fatal to a monster hunter. Studies of combat soldiers show that up to 25% of them experience some degree of paralysis when they first encounter the enemy, even after years of training. Firefighters report that recruits often freeze when they see live fire for the first time, despite months of preparation. Now imagine your reaction to seeing something your mind can't even properly categorize. Neuroscientist Dr. Antonio Damasio studied cases of people who encountered extremely dangerous animals in the wild. He discovered that the human brain has an automatic shutdown response when confronted with something it considers impossible to defeat. It's literally our mind protecting us from the terrifying reality of our situation. This can last from a few seconds to several minutes, more than enough time for any predator to eliminate the threat. Even if you manage to overcome this initial paralysis, there's another documented psychological problem: anticipatory post-traumatic stress disorder. Elite soldiers who know they're about to face extreme situations often develop PTSD symptoms before the mission even begins. Nightmares, panic attacks, loss of appetite, chronic insomnia. And that's just knowing they'll be facing other humans. War. Veterans who have faced the most extreme situations imaginable admit that anticipation is often worse than actual combat. Major John Spencer, an urban warfare expert, said in an interview that his most experienced soldiers developed obsessive rituals before missions, checking their equipment dozens of times, not out of necessity, but because their minds needed something to occupy themselves before facing the impossible. Let's talk about gear. In games and movies, monster hunters wear elaborate armor and fantastic weapons. In real life, gear would be your greatest enemy. A full suit of medieval armor weighs between 30 and 50 kilograms. Sounds like a small amount. Try carrying a 30-kilogram backpack for an hour while running and see how it feels. The U.S. Army found that soldiers carrying more than 60 pounds of equipment reduced their combat effectiveness by 50%. Above 90 pounds, they become virtually useless in situations requiring mobility. And this is with modern equipment designed to distribute weight efficiently. Medieval armor concentrates weight in a way that's terrifying for the human body. But let's say you could get your hands on modern armor made with advanced materials. Even then, any protection sufficient to withstand supernatural claws and fangs would be incredibly heavy and restrictive. The world's most advanced bulletproof vests weigh about 20 pounds 10 kilograms and protect only the torso. Full body armor against extreme physical attacks would easily weigh 180 pounds 80 kilograms or more. And what about weapons? This is where the cruel physics of reality takes over. A typical medieval sword weighs between 1 and 2 kilograms. After a few minutes of intense combat, your arms would begin to tremble with fatigue. Masters of modern historical fencing, people who have dedicated decades to studying and practicing sword techniques, admit that after 10 minutes of simulated combat against a human opponent, the technique deteriorates dramatically. Now consider that you'd be facing something potentially 3 times larger, 10 times stronger, and with superhuman speed. The force required to pierce the skin of a mythical creature would likely be impossible for a human to generate. Medieval knights often smashed swords against armor, and we're talking metal against metal. Imagine metal against supernatural scales or magical skin. Historical weapons expert Dr. Mike Lodes conducted experiments attempting to replicate wounds described in medieval legends. He discovered that it would be physically impossible for an ordinary human to generate enough force for some of the attacks described, even with perfect techniques and superior weapons. The biomechanical limits of the human body are absolute, but let's assume you have modern equipment, firearms, explosives, military technology. Here's the problem: supernatural creatures, by definition, don't follow the laws of physics we know. A bullet that can take down a bear might not scratch a being that operates under different physical principles. Big cat hunters in Africa report that even with high-powered rifles, it often takes several accurate shots to bring down a wounded lion. And lions are normal animals with no magical powers or supernatural resistances. A wounded lion becomes 10 times more dangerous, attacking with desperate fury. Imagine that multiplied 100-fold with a creature that can regenerate or is naturally resistant to physical damage. The most underrated factor of all is intelligence. In games, monsters often have predictable attack patterns. In reality, any predator that survived long enough to become legendary would be incredibly intelligent and adaptable. Great white sharks, for example, are known to change their hunting strategies based on previous experiences. They learn and adapt. Leopard hunters in British colonial India documented cases where injured big cats completely changed their behavior, becoming nocturnal when they were previously diurnal, shifting territories, and even feigning injuries to attract prey. And these are just normal cats. A truly supernatural creature would have intelligence beyond our comprehension. It could study your tactics, learn your patterns, even use tools or magic to adapt. You'd literally be hunting something smarter than you, stronger than you, faster than you, and with powers you don't even understand. The question of logistics is something that is never adequately addressed. How would you track a supernatural creature? Ordinary footprints can be followed by experienced trackers, but what if the creature can fly? What if it can teleport? What if it leaves no physical trace? Professional wildlife trackers spend years learning the habits of a single species. They study feeding patterns, reproductive cycles, preferred territories, and seasonal behaviors. A tracker specializing in wolves would be useless trying to track bears. Now imagine trying to track something that has never been properly studied, something that could break all the rules of nature. And where would you find reliable information? Most reports of supernatural creatures are inconsistent, contradictory, or clearly exaggerated. How would you distinguish fact from fiction when your life depends on it? A mistake in identifying a creature's capabilities would be literally fatal. The medical issue is perhaps the most dire of all. Wounds caused by wild animal attacks are notoriously difficult to treat. Claws and teeth cause torn, uncleaned wounds that are extremely prone to infection. Wild animal bites carry bacteria that can be fatal even with modern medical treatment. Dr. Sarah Chen, an emergency medicine specialist, has studied injuries caused by large predator attacks. She found that even injuries that aren't immediately fatal often result in death from sepsis or blood loss. And that's assuming you have immediate access to advanced medical care. Now imagine injuries inflicted by supernatural creatures, magical poisons, curses, wounds that don't heal normally, supernatural infections. How would you treat something that modern medicine can't even properly diagnose? A simple scratch from a magical creature can be a death sentence, and that's not even considering the long-term effects. Professional wildlife hunters have an extremely high incidence of stress-related health problems. Early onset arthritis from carrying heavy equipment, heart problems from constant stress, hearing damage from exposure to loud noises, not to mention psychological problems. A 2018 study of professional crocodile hunters in Australia found that 78% developed some form of anxiety disorder, 45% experienced episodes of severe depression, and 23% developed dependence on alcohol or other substances as a way to cope with stress. And this was while hunting common animals. The social reality would also be brutal. Monster hunters would be viewed as madmen by ordinary society. How would you explain your profession? How would you secure financial support? Governments would likely try to study you or use you as a weapon. Religious organizations could view you as a heretic or a savior. You would become a target for all manner of fanatics and opportunists. Historically, people who claim to have encountered supernatural creatures were often persecuted, imprisoned, or killed. During witchcraft trials in Europe, anyone with unusual knowledge about strange creatures or phenomena was automatically suspect. You would be a social outcast, unable to have normal relationships or a stable life, and the financial aspect would be impossible. How would you make money hunting creatures that don't officially exist? There's no life insurance for monster hunters. There's no workers' compensation if you're injured by a dragon. You'd be financially ruined from day one. Specialized equipment would cost a fortune. Custom weapons, bespoke armor, advanced tracking devices, specialized medical supplies. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars just for basic equipment. And that's assuming you could find someone willing to manufacture these things for you. The legal issue would be a nightmare. What jurisdiction would you operate in? How would you explain property destruction caused during a hunt? What if you accidentally injured or killed someone while chasing a creature? Lawyers specializing in supernatural cases don't exist. But let's pretend you overcame all these obstacles. You gained elite military training, impossible equipment, unlimited financial support, and complete legal immunity. Still, you would fail for one very simple reason. You're human. Human biological limits are absolute. Our maximum speed, our maximum strength, our maximum reflexes, our maximum endurance, all of these have ceilings that cannot be surpassed without genetic or cybernetic modification. And even Olympic athletes, people who represent the absolute peak of human performance, are pathetic compared to nature's predators. Usain Bolt, the fastest man in the world, runs 45 kilometers per hour in short bursts. A cheetah reaches 120 kilometers per hour. A peregrine falcon dives at over 300 kilometers per hour. And these are normal animals, limited by ordinary physics. Eddie Hall, one of the world's strongest men, lifts 500 kilograms from the ground with maximum preparation and support equipment. An average gorilla can lift 4,000 pounds effortlessly. An elephant can lift 9,000 kilograms. Again, normal animals. Our reflexes are pathetic compared to other predators. A snake can strike in 50 milliseconds. Our average reaction time is 250 milliseconds, 5 times slower, even with intensive training. The best we can do is reduce this to about 150 milliseconds, still 3 times slower than a common snake. And that's just against normal land animals. Imagine creatures that can move through dimensions, that can appear and disappear at will, that can manipulate time or space. You literally wouldn't even see the attack coming. Fatigue is another fatal factor. Humans are endurance animals, designed for long, sustained pursuits, not for bursts of intense activity. We can run marathons, but we can't maintain top speed for more than a few seconds. In a life-or-death struggle, you'd need intense bursts of activity. Exactly what our bodies aren't optimized for. Professional fighters, people who have dedicated their entire lives to combat, become exhausted after 3 minutes of intense combat. Against other humans, after 5 minutes, even the best begin to make basic mistakes that would be fatal against a real predator. But perhaps the most underestimated factor is the sheer randomness of nature. Even the world's most experienced hunters admit that luck is a huge factor. A moment of distraction, a piece of equipment that fails at the wrong moment, an unexpected change in the animal's behavior, any of these things can be fatal. Steve Backshall, one of the world's most experienced explorers, nearly died multiple times even while dealing with animals he knew intimately. Once, he was attacked by a hippo he had been studying for months. The animal had been consistently peaceful, but one day, for reasons that have never been understood, it decided to attack without warning. Bear Grylls, another famous survivalist, broke his back in a parachuting accident during a routine expedition. He wasn't attacked by an animal. He didn't make any technical mistakes. He was just unlucky, and this effectively ended his extreme exploration career. Now multiply that randomness by 100 when you're dealing with supernatural creatures that may have whims and motivations completely alien to our understanding. You can do everything right and still die because the creature decided, for incomprehensible mystical reasons, that today would be a good day to be especially aggressive. The issue of imperfect information is crucial. Every professional hunter relies on accumulated knowledge about their prey. They know when animals are most active, where they prefer to hunt, how they react when wounded, and what their weak points are. This knowledge comes from generations of accumulated experience. With supernatural creatures, you'd be operating virtually blind. Every encounter would be a potentially fatal experiment. You wouldn't know if a creature is solitary or lives in groups, territorial or nomadic, more dangerous during the day or at night, dormant or constantly active, and unlike normal animals, supernatural creatures may not follow logical patterns. A normal animal is motivated by basic needs: food, reproduction, territory, survival. Magical creatures can have completely abstract motivations. They may attack out of boredom, curiosity, whim, or for reasons our human minds can't even comprehend. Another rarely considered factor is scale. In games, you often fight massive creatures in convenient arenas. In reality, where exactly would you find a dragon to fight? In a city, you'd destroy entire blocks of civilian property. In a forest, you'd have no room to maneuver. In an open field, the creature would have every advantage. The environment would always favor the creature. Dragons can fly, so they would have a three-dimensional advantage. Aquatic creatures can hide in the depths. Subterranean creatures can attack from any direction. Creatures that camouflage themselves could constantly ambush you. You would always be fighting on their turf under their conditions. And let's not forget the numbers factor. In real nature, large predators often hunt in groups. Lions hunt in prides, wolves in packs, orcas in family groups. If supernatural creatures followed similar patterns, you could be facing multiple threats simultaneously. Imagine trying to fight 3 dragons at once, or a pack of werewolves coordinating attacks, or a family of supernatural creatures protecting their territory. Even if you could defeat an individual creature, multiple creatures working together would be simply impossible. The technological question is also fascinating. Our current technology is designed for threats we understand. Weapons are effective against flesh and blood, but what about creatures made of pure energy? Radars detect physical objects, but what about creatures that exist partially in other dimensions? Electronic communications work well, but what if the very presence of a supernatural creature interferes with electronics? Many reports of supernatural phenomena include unexplained electronic failures. Cameras stop working, radios produce only static, GPS loses signal, and batteries drain instantly. If this is true, you would lose your most important technological Advantages just when you need them most, and even if the technology worked, you'd be limited by available resources. Ammo runs out, batteries die, equipment breaks. In a prolonged hunt against an intelligent creature, you'd literally be run to the point of exhaustion. Experienced military personnel know that logistics wins wars, no matter how well-trained or equipped you are. If you run out of supplies, you lose. And against a creature that can potentially track you, disrupt your supply lines, or even manipulate your equipment in ways you can't even imagine, logistics becomes impossible. Let's talk about something that's often overlooked, the family factor. Professional hunters of dangerous animals often come from families where this is a generations-old tradition. They grew up learning these skills as children, developing instincts and reflexes through gradual exposure over decades. You, an ordinary person, wouldn't have this foundation. You'd be trying to develop in months or years skills that traditionally take decades to master. And that's assuming you had access to qualified mentors, which obviously wouldn't exist for hunting supernatural creatures. Most importantly, these traditional hunters have support networks, entire communities that understand the risks, can provide backup, know how to treat specific injuries, and can continue the hunt if you become incapacitated. As a monster hunter, you would be completely alone. Psychological loneliness would be devastating. Humans are social animals. We need connection and emotional support to function properly. Prolonged isolation leads to depression, paranoia, and impaired judgment, exactly what you can't have when your life depends on quick, accurate decisions. And there's no retirement system for monster hunters. Professional athletes retire at 30 or 35 when their bodies can no longer compete at the highest level. Elite soldiers often transition to less physical positions as they age. But supernatural creatures don't respect your age or declining physical condition. In real nature, old or injured predators often starve to death because they can no longer hunt effectively. As an aging monster hunter, you would become progressively less effective until you inevitably make a fatal mistake. There's no pension plan that covers retirement due to supernatural occupational lethality. Another rarely considered aspect is the development of addictions and self-destructive behaviors. Constant exposure to extreme trauma, regular life or death stress, and the inability to have a normal social life almost inevitably lead to unhealthy coping mechanisms. Combat veterans have alarmingly high rates of alcoholism, drug addiction, and other risky behaviors, and they at least have support systems, available therapy, and social recognition for their service. Monster hunters would have all the trauma without any of the support resources. The ultimate irony is that even if you manage to become a successful monster hunter, you would likely lose your humanity in the process. Constant exposure to extreme violence, the need to suppress empathy and fear, and social isolation would all fundamentally change who you are as a person. Veteran soldiers often talk about how combat changed them in irreversible ways. Many struggle to reconnect with normal emotions, to form healthy relationships, to find pleasure in everyday activities, and they were at least fighting against other humans for causes they could understand and with the support of their communities. As a monster hunter, you would be dealing with even more extreme trauma in even greater isolation for goals that society would consider delusional. You would become so alienated from normal human experience that it could be argued that you cease to be truly human. And in the end, what would be the point? In games and movies, monster hunters are heroes protecting humanity. In reality, you'd more likely be seen as a dangerous vigilante, a mentally unstable individual with access to powerful weapons, and an obsession with imaginary creatures. Even if you could prove the creatures existed, you'd likely be absorbed into government or military organizations. You'd lose your independence and become a tool for political agendas you neither understand nor control. Your experience and knowledge would be exploited by people who see you as nothing more than a disposable resource. The sad reality is that being a monster hunter in real life wouldn't be an epic adventure filled with glory and heroism. It would be a brutal, lonely, and likely very short existence, almost certainly ending in violent death, madness, or both. You wouldn't be a legendary hero. You'd be a tragic footnote in the story of someone who took fantasy too far And perhaps, that's the greatest irony of all. Our cultural fascination with monster hunters stems from our desire to be special, to transcend the mundane limitations of everyday life, to become legends. But the reality would be exactly the opposite. You'd lose everything that makes human life valuable. In a desperate search for meaning in a world that neither understands nor appreciates your sacrifices. So the next time you're playing your favorite monster hunting game, or watching your favorite movie about supernatural heroes, remember that you're watching a carefully constructed fantasy. Reality would be infinitely crueler, lonelier, and more fatal than any fiction has ever dared to portray. And perhaps that's for the best, because some dreams are best left as dreams. The inconvenient truth is that we ordinary humans, with all our physical, psychological, and social limitations, were not made to hunt monsters. We were made to live in communities, to love and be loved, to find meaning in simple but profound human connections. And perhaps acknowledging these limitations is true wisdom, not trying to transcend them in pursuit of an impossible glory that would cost everything that truly matters.